So this is Saturday, the 26th of September 2020. Now this high-flying Vatican cardinal resigns following London property probe. That is historic, isn't it? That somebody involved in property corruption and scam has resigned their other position. That is unbelievable, unheard of. I mean, whoever ever heard of a degenerator in property resigning or paying any price for the corruption? But this is why this item is historic and unprecedented. One of the Vatican's most powerful cardinals has resigned suddenly amid an investigation into the suspected misuse of Catholic charitable funds for investments in luxury London real estate. The Vatican said Cardinal Giovanni Angelo Becciu, the Italian head of the church's office for appointing saints, had relinquished his rights as a cardinal after a meeting with Pope Francis. Now, he's the one that was head of the office for appointing saints. I mean, the pretentiousness of the whole office. It should never have existed. How can a human being appoint saints? But that is the item in the copy there. The fall of one of Vatican's most powerful figures comes as Holy See prosecutors pursue a global probe into the finances of the Secretariat of State, the Vatican's central administration arm, where Cardinal Becciu, 72, served as second in command from 2011 to 2018. 2011, it rings the bell. 2011 is the year when the Tower Hamlets in London's East End, Tower Hamlets Council's benefits manager, the crook Steve Hill, colluded with the Tower Hamlets community housing fronted by the racist and the crook Mike Tyrrell and other assorted criminals, as they conspired to carry out the eviction of the campaigner against racism that Mike Tyrrell had targeted in July 1996, when the campaigner against racist attacks in Tower Hamlets was wrongly perceived by the racist Mike Tyrrell that the campaigner had targeted Mike Tyrrell in the campaign against racist attacks in Tower Hamlets. That was not the case. The campaign was and remains targeted against racist attacks, racist prejudice, racist abuse, racist negligence. never intended to be against an individual unless all the objective evidence point to a particular perpetrator, in which case there cannot be any justification for the racist perpetrator to even assume any right to deny their perpetration of the responsibility of the liability. So, Mike Tyrrell, Steve Hill, Colin Cormack, Keith Brown, these are the names that you will be familiar with from the previous broadcasts on this channel, the campaigning channel. So, 2011 is what? 2 years after 2009. And the target of the racist attack by eviction had already been denied the money that they were owed legally by the DWP, deprivation, want and poverty creation. DWP deprivation, want and poverty creation. So if this particular property scam person was involved in anything in 2011, whatever he has been forced to relinquish or give up would never anywhere come to anywhere near measuring or equaling the extent and the implications of the losses caused to the anti-racist campaigns organizer by the criminals Steve Hill, Mike Tyrrell, Colin Cormack, and Keith Brown et al. In Tower Hamlets, London East End. And the implications, the ramifications, and the costly consequences of the losses that were caused to the target of the racist eviction attack continue to mount every single second as we speak, as we record this particular edition of the Khoodeelaar campaign's world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. We shall come back to update on the behavior of the racist gang and their tolerators in the council. Tower Hamlets Council had a duty already and still has since the perpetrations of the original criminality perpetrated by Steve Hill and other racists. The Tower Hamlets Council as the local council, local so-called authority, had a duty of care and the duty to be honest and fair in the discharge of its duties. Tower Hamlets Council has never been fair, unbiased, or neutral in discharging its duties. For a start, it never has been keen on discharging duties it has owed and it owes to the electorate, to the community corresponding the name Tower Hamlets, the community in Tower Hamlets, in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets. It is the same borough and it's the same local council, so-called, that were featured in the corrupt congratulatory question put by the corrupt Una King in June 1998. Una King, as the by then 13-month-old MP, that is MP, she has been an MP for 13 months by then, because the election of May 1997 took place 13 months before she stood up in the House of Commons during the Tony Blair-Beliard Prime Minister's questions, probably on the 17th of June 1998. And her question, Una King's corrupt, dishonest, and criminally scripted praise for the crooks in Tower Hamlets Council in place at the Times, 17th of June, 1998. She asked following the format of Prime Minister's questions, asked Tony Blair during the Prime Minister's questions, will my right honorable friend join me in congratulating Tower Hamlets Council, etc., etc. And she kind of added the so-called apparent kind of research and scholastic kind of source for her assertion, which was absolutely unscholarly and stupid and ignorant and not factually accurate, let alone being true. She said that Tower Hamlets Council had reduced housing waiting list by 10%. Now, any reasonable person who understands maths, basic maths, would know that if there is 10% reduction, that leaves 90% intact without being resolved. So 90% of the people who are on the housing waiting list were left languishing on the housing waiting list. And she did not consider that as too much of a failure by the local council. Instead, the 10% she claimed that had been reduced by the council of the waiting list warranted their being congratulated by the incumbent so-called prime minister of the time, as well as by the one of the two constituency MPs allegedly representing the deprived borough of Tower Hamlets. She was one of the two, and she was never representing the truth. She was representing lies and untruths and denials and corruption, and she was audacious in her criminality in defying the people, 90%, who were left languishing on housing waiting list. That she asked him, Blair, to join her in congratulating the corrupt council showed the depth of idiocy that she was actually sunk in. So what could she be representing? This question arises because in the recent weeks, our campaign has been asking the House of Commons Information Office to provide evidence, legal evidence as to the duties of the elected MPs to their constituents, including especially the question about whether the MPs owed a duty to answer questions put to them by their individual constituents. And the answer from the House of Commons Information Office has so far remained the same, which is that individual members of parliament in the British Parliament do not have to answer questions, do not have to even reply to correspondence sent to them by members of the constituency, whether the constituency members concerned had voted for the particular MP or not. So this is a land of nowhere. This is a kind of completely lost kind of platform, which is empty of any responsibility, liability. So when people claim that this is the mother of parliament, this is the evidence that contradicts that claim and exposes that claim as being totally infantile, ignorant, and stupid. If elected members have no duty to write to their constituents in reply to any matter that the constituent concerned or constituents concerned bring to their attention, then what's the point? And how, what basis, on what basis can that particular member of parliament claim to be representing anyone from the constituency? This is an exclusive, world exclusive diagnosis of the Fleet Street media, which includes necessarily the diagnosis of the corrupt, dysfunctioning Mother of Parliament and the corrupt, dysfunctioning members of Parliament and the corrupt, dysfunctioning members of the opposition benches. Because there is no law and there is no compulsion against members of Parliament speaking their minds, speaking the truth about anything that affects the constituents' interests. Let's say the constituent. And every constituency has any number of factors, people affected by all manners of decisions that affect their lives. So most of the constituencies have maximum number of aspects of life being present in the lives of the constituents. So therefore, an average constituency member or an average member of the electorate or the average member of the population in a constituency is likely to have issues that they can raise with somebody with democratic kind of duties to find an answer to. As I said about Stephen Timms, the East Ham MP in London Borough of Newham. Stephen Timms has not been answering questions put to him about the Newham Council's corruption and Newham Council's criminal behavior as perpetrated behind the frontage of Roxana Fiaz, who is the current incumbent in the corrupt post of elected mayor in Newham at the expense of Newham. So when Cardinal, what's his name? The Cardinal's name is Giovanni Angelo Becciu, Becciu. So Becciu. So Giovanni Angelo Becciu. That is how I pronounce the Becciu, the last one. I think I have got an approximation to the other two parts of his name. Almost correct. But Becciu, the Italian name, I cannot pronounce as accurately as I would like to. So whatever his name, Cardinal Becciu is how he is described in short, is age 72. And he served from the 2011 to 2018 as the second in command in the Department for Appointing Saints, the Vatican's Department for Appointing Saints. Now, obviously, he was not playing a saintly part at all. He was playing a devil's part or devilish part and a corrupt part. Now, he has had to publicly be kind of exposed as having failed in his duties because he abused his position and got involved in property scam in London. Imagine the contrast. All the criminals engaged in the racist attack by eviction, the criminals named as Steve Hill, Mike Tyrrell, Keith Brown, Colin Cormack et al. In that period, let's say, period of 1996 to September, which is the anniversary month here, September 2011. So these criminals were perpetrating series of crimes against a person's housing rights, and they are plotting one after the other. There were plots after plots of confected excuses and pretexts they were looking for in order to perpetrate the targeted eviction against that person. Compare this against the claim, the lying falsehood that Una King uttered in June 1998 during that Prime Minister's questions, in which she congratulated the crooks in Tower Hamlets Council over their allegedly having successfully got rid of 10% of the outing waiting list. And in that criminal intervention, promoting the image of the crooked council as having achieved something which they had not, Una King exhibited her role and the agenda she was serving against the housing rights of people. Now, the rights of the people, on housing human rights of the people in Tower Hamlets remain violated now, as of today, as we speak, as we record this world exclusive diagnosis at 13:41 hours GMT on Saturday, 26th of September 2020. It remains in breach, active breach of its duties under the law to help people find and stay in their homes without interference, without harassment, without violations of their rights. And these rights include the rights enshrined in all the statements, declarations, charters, conventions, and agreements that the United Kingdom as a government, as a state, remains signed up to and was signed up to when Una King was lying in June 1998 and when Mike Tyrrell was lying and conspiring in July 1996 and continued to lie and conspire along with the collusion of Steve Hill throughout the years that followed, the 4 years to 2000 plus another 11 years. So 13 years, they continued to conspire to evict an absolutely law-abiding tenant in council property. And the property changed control or ownership in 2006, the second property, because the first property, the tenant had to leave because of totally corrupt and criminal atmosphere created by the crooks in the council, neglecting the criminality that prevailed on the corridor of the building called Ashington House. And then the tenant moved to another property which was still owned by the council, which transferred ownership by the time Mike Tyrrell got round to resuming his attack by eviction in 2006. Now, neither the Tower Hamlets Council at the time between 1996 to the February 2001, during which time the target of eviction attacks by Tower Hamlets Council and Mike Tyrrell continued. But the complaints against the criminal gangs occupying the corridor, the complaints were completely ignored by Tower Hamlets Council from 1996 to February 2001. And the Metropolitan Police person who was supposedly deployed to deal with antisocial behavior, including on the estate where Ashington House was and still is. The Metropolitan Police person must have been under orders not to deal with the criminals. So they said to the complaining tenants that they could not do anything, and there was no coherent answer to the hundreds of questions put to the police through that particular person and to the council about why they were failing and refusing to remove these criminals from the corridors. One sole councillor, still a councillor at the time, one sole councillor who took any notice of the complaints and took any step to help end the siege of the corridors and the estate by the criminals was called Ray Marney, Marney, Ray Marney. Ray Marney was the only councillor who took any notice of the complaints. Now imagine there are 50 plus councillors at the time. Nobody took any notice. Only one took a notice, but he could not physically patrol the area like the police could. And he made his particular opinion known to the council and to the police, and they didn't do anything, which is what we discussed in part 3 yesterday, about that estate and about other criminality being allowed by the police in Tower Hamlets, by the council in Tower Hamlets to frustrate and to completely destroy the peace and tranquility and freedom for ordinary people to move around their house, their flats, and to come out of their flat peacefully and independently without any interference from criminals standing on the staircases outside or on the corridors outside. What kind of basis is that for a council to be given congratulation by the local MP? And what kind of basis is there for the Prime Minister of the country to be asked to congratulate such a criminal council? So that was a long kind of detailed update on various key facts. And we shall be coming back to that in due course, because the criminality and the violations of housing rights, housing human rights, are continuing unabated. And this is the context against which this particular expression of concern about ban on eviction proceedings being lifted should be seen. Eviction proceedings have never stopped, and the targets of eviction proceedings, eviction agendas, have never been left alone by the attackers. And the attackers, Steve Hill, Mike Tyrrell, Keith Brown, Colin Cormack, only represent the ones that our campaign can absolutely, verifiably kind of name. This is a tip of the iceberg. There were other, and there are other, there have been other hundreds of criminals in places in council housing sections, benefit sections, council estates, who are violating the rights of the tenants and residents and allowing criminals to dominate the area and also target the victim of the antisocial behavior and victims of the racist conspiracy, like the ones hatched by Mike Tyrrell, to be targeted for further harassment and eviction and losses of amenities, losses of the housing rights, housing human rights, and in this case, the rights to produce worldwide kind of solutions to the biggest problems, to some of the biggest problems, to one of the biggest problems that the world has faced, which is of poverty, hunger, and destitution and displacement of millions of people. Calculate that. One person's life is incalculable in terms of money terms. One person's life that is destroyed, one person that is displaced out of their home and out of their country, out of their estate or society or community. The losses are immeasurable, incalculable. So multiply that by the millions or hundreds of millions. And you can begin to see why such a wide-ranging implication to solve the problems of such complexity is worth thousands of times more than the known reported wealth, money wealth, owned by or possessed by Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, or Bill Gates, and all of them put together many times over. That was the kind of work that was affected by the racists, Mike Tyrrell, Steve Hill, Colin Cormack, Keith Brown. Over the years, 1996 to 2011. And then Colin Cormack still continued, and Steve Hill still continued, and Mike Tyrrell still continued up to the very end of the time that Tyrrell was removed by the so-called kind of housing association regulator, the part of the Ministry of Housing. Not because of his racism, not because of his criminal racist behavior, but because of the fraud that he perpetrated inside the Tower Hamlets community housing. So he was removed, but he was not removed without being awarded a huge sum of money that belongs to the public. And the council itself, in its own wrongs, awarded or rewarded the criminal Mike Tyrrell with a kind of honor that is staged in 2013. Soon after, Tyrrell was condemned, and the Tower Hamlets Community Housing Association, Community Housing, yes, was condemned for having broken all the pledges and all the undertakings it had given, so-called on paper, to look after the tenants that were in the council-owned properties that got transferred in the second wave of the transfers, and this time to the Tower Hamlets Community Housing. And the reason why Tower Hamlets councils, Labour councillors, conspired to give an award to the crook, racist crook and criminal Mike Tyrrell, was a retaliation. Not because he deserved it, but they staged a retaliation against the public condemnation of the whole transfer scheme that was put on the record during a sitting of the Tower Hamlets Council on the 26th of June 2013. And that criticism was the tip of the iceberg of the criticism, which could not be fully articulated or stated in full, because the speaker of the council meeting, Leslie Pavitt, a lying racist criminal, suspended the meeting, and thus she sabotaged the presentation of the full statement. But essentially the statement was made, and it had been made, and it is being made now here, and it will continue to be made until the council does the least it should have done. Start the process of paying damages and compensations and more, and apologize to the target of the racist attacks, serial racist attacks that it allowed to be perpetrated by the criminals. And the criminals, like the criminal Steve Hill, must be sacked and must be prosecuted. There is no chance that he will be sacked, because the council itself is criminals, as it proves time and again. For example, when the council was condemned for allowing gang of criminals in places, in posts, in the then youth service of the Tower Hamlets Council, as having been involved in organized criminality and theft, the council didn't do anything against them. Not only did Town Hamlets Council do nothing, it continued to cover up the evidence, hide the evidence of the organized criminals' crimes. So we shall be talking about Town Hamlets Council corruption and the rest, and compare the public humiliation of the Vatican's Giovanni Angelo Becqui, who has been publicly shamed for having indulged in a housing scam in London with money that should have been made available for other genuine purposes. And in the case of the housing, and the Financial Times, which today, Saturday, the 26th of September 2020, contains a supplement which it calls House and Home. And it is, it's a picture on the front page of that section. This doesn't look like a council estate, does it? So the Financial Times is not even aware of the millions of people who are in council estates, and the items are as removed from reality as possible. But this looks like another fake kind of headline. Many of Britain's treasured country estates were financed by colonialism and slavery. How are their owners coming to terms with this? Now, this is again a historic piece by the Financial Times. It's an admission, although the contents, the copy will not have anything like the full facts or the full implication. But this is a beginning, and it's an exception, and note this. And it's a colonial money from colonialism. Very rare. Colonialism being even printed is in itself an achievement. So it's a wrong kind of word, the name, this paragraph starts with the wrong name. Blairgwan Castle is an idyllic wedding venue in western Scotland. Located on the banks of the River Garvan, it has imposing stone walls and well-maintained gardens. It featured in the film The Queen as a double for Balmoral. So that's the picture of the castle. And it was funded by money from the colonies, the empires. And this is the contrast. Everything, if they actually are prepared and willing to confess to even a fraction of the truth about the wealth of this country and the resources of this country, then they have to admit a lot of it is stolen property from the countries, the colonized places. So we'll be talking about the colonies and the money from the colonies more. And there is this magazine which is grotesquely, completely offensively titled How to Spend It. That assumption is that you have it. You can only spend it if you have it. And this is only possible to touch if you spend £4 to buy it. Now, how many people on benefits have £4 to spend just for one paper, let alone the other papers, on one day? On average, the Fleet Street papers cost £15, let's say. And if you include the others, the daily papers cost about £50. The cover price is about £50 if you get all the main ones from the regions. And then if you have to travel to pick them up because they are not available in your average news agents, then it will be a daily budget, actual cash equivalent or expenditure cash worth about £150 because you have to travel that many places, that far. And it will take you 4 to 5 hours every day to get hold of these papers. And once you get the papers, it will be like the pagination, the numbers of pages on average day, if you get most of the titles, would be like 12,000 pages. So how many people would be needed to go through the contents, 12,000, 10,000 pages? And what kind of sense would they be able to make on the basis of the contents of 10,000, 12,000 pages? Now that is exactly the kind of work that our campaign has been doing for decades. So imagine the result and the kind of summary of the finds every day for decades. How much cover price does it represent? And how much back issues collection cost does that entail? And how long will that take to get all of that brought together? Now that the criminals have displaced the target of their racistly motivated, criminally motivated attack via eviction. So we shall be talking about these criminals and the course and so on in due course. Now, over to the Daily Mirror, which is running an advertisement on the front page. It's being wrapped in an NHS advertisement. And then there is this predictable piece about the police person who was shot dead in Croydon yesterday. There's a typical tabloid topic. And most of the tabloids are saying that the police knew the criminal who killed the policeman, and that there was not enough check when he was put in custody. There were not enough checks so that they couldn't detect he had a gun. Well, that is, again, unfortunate, but that is the representative, authentic representation of the state of affairs. When the virus, the pandemic, hit the UK, the entirety of the UK government was caught unprepared, negligent, unaccountable. So the police personnel how many of them were involved in the checking of this person, dangerous person, went under any rigorous regime of kind of alertness themselves, which is how that particular weapon got carried into the custody. That is based on just what we are reading, that there was no checking. How was the question has been put, how was he allowed to carry a gun into the custody? What happened in the process that he must have been checked? More of that will come out and more questions will be raised. But essentially the thread running underneath these questions is the absence of the culture of accountability everywhere. Wrongs are done by wrongdoers who plot all the time. But the duty of the accountability regime is to prevent wrongs being done. And the police was founded, the police as a force was founded with the main aim of protecting the public and society. That includes a big way preventing crime and wrongdoing and violence. Now here, moving on from there to corruption in the nepotistic family of Boris Johnson. This page 2 piece in the Daily Mirror says, virus test farm hopes a job for Boris's brother will open doors. The open corruption going on here. And that Daily Mirror piece features, of course, Stanley, the ubiquitous Stanley Johnson is there. And the piece says that Max Johnson has been appointed to the board of government, to the board of a company. What's the name of the company? Max Johnson has been parading himself as a kind of un-Johnsonian Johnson. That has been his CB, kind of his niche kind of CB. He has been all over the place, Hong Kong, etc., and he has been parading himself as not like the other Johnsons, or at least not like Boris Johnson. But that has been a faked, elaborate kind of scam itself. And the company is Revive Global. And this company is offering private COVID-19 antigen tests for nearly £90 each. Dr. Barnish said they are using laboratories also used by NHS Test and Trace. And this is just a tip of the iceberg that keeps being kind of touched on every single day in this pandemonium of the government that is failing the public. But one thing it is not failing, it's persistently being caught, being involved in corrupt passing of the public money to various companies and outfits and outlets, either connected to Dominic Cummings or connected to Boris Johnson, whatever. That is the persistent factor, and that is wrong. But despite this, Keir Starmer, the so-called opposition leader, has sacked a young MP elected from Manchester, yes, for daring to vote, daring to be among the 17 or 18 Labour Party members who voted against a torturer kind of bill that is on the table and will be passed because the majority of the Conservatives is guaranteed to pass any bill, but the Keir Starmer fronted Labour MPs are going to vote for a torture bill. Think about that. And the outcry over that serious piece of evidence of Starmer being a torturer or a supporter of the torture bill, that has not been featuring on the front page of the Daily Mirror. Well, this is a important story, so this space should be given to the torture bill as well, but it isn't. No space is given to the torture bill. And as I was saying yesterday, the statement published by the New Statesman, New SS, statement by Noam Chomsky expressing concern about the future of the planet. That statement, as I said, was a telltale piece of evidence of Chomsky's position. Chomsky doesn't mention race, racism, or racist in that interview, so-called, nor does he refer to colonialism. He talks about the future of the world and the likelihood of nuclear war and fascism, but he doesn't talk about racism, which is the bigger threat, because the whole world is being dominated by racists and racist agendas. That's the truth. And by dominated, I refer to the actual grip and control over the money and the resources and the wealth of nations. That the war traders, warmongers, and torturers of these countries, UK, USA, France, etc., have got control of. So they're, on the one hand, they're caught exposed as unprepared to provide protection to the public in the face of the virus, while they are vigorously, viciously continuing the program to torture people in the targeted countries. So what was the lesson from this case, the Belhaj case? Belhaj case that was actually published in January 2017. It condemned the role of the British government in colluding with the USA forces torturing a Libyan opposition activist, opposition campaigner, opposition politician, Belhaj. Has the forensic examiner, licensed law trader Keir Starmer, no awareness that his sacking of Nadia Whittam of Manchester will be seen as a damning piece of evidence of his unfitness to be leader of the Labour Party? So this is the part A of the world exclusive diagnosis of the Fleet Street media, in the context carrying the whole of the real evidence that the media does not publish. And the evidence focused this time on an updating of the role of the racist criminals doing the targeted evicting, serial evicting of a campaigner against racism and racist attacks in Tar Hamlers. And in so targeting, on the one hand, they have been allowed to do that because there is no rule of law, there is no law and order, there is no due process available to stop these criminals behaving in this way, in the way that they have been allowed to behave from 1996 to now, let's say, because the ramifications, the impact and the effects of their criminality continue to add to the damages and losses every minute to this day. And the losses and damages include the losses and damages to the cause of solving the world's biggest humanitarian crisis of homelessness on a vast scale for millions, dislocation and displacement, genocide, and mass starvation and hunger. These issues will be continued to be updated in the next broadcast of this Khoodeelaar television channel.